When Donald Trump told Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett to sit down, girl, during a live hearing, the room came to a standstill. Then she responded with a reply so sharp, yet composed, it left even his staunchest allies speechless. The camera was recording, bright lights humming overhead. The House Oversight Committee hearing on federal transparency had been dragging on for over 5 hours, but the air in the room was still charged. Reporters hunched over their phones, aides exchanged whispers. Everyone felt the moment approaching. Donald J. Trump sat at the center table, unfazed, leafing through a few sheets of paper as if he didn't have a care in the world. Dressed in his signature navy suit and red tie, he appeared like someone who was never used to being challenged, especially not by a black congresswoman from South Dallas with no tolerance for games. Representative Jasmine Crockett, sharp in a cobalt blazer and black glasses, adjusted her microphone and spoke directly, calmly, her gaze fixed firmly on Trump. "Mr. Trump," she began, turning a page, "can you clarify why, in your 2019 and 2020 disclosures, there were such significant discrepancies in the valuations of your overseas assets?" Trump glanced up, sank back into his chair, and smirked. It was precisely the moment he'd been waiting for. "I've been more transparent than anyone here," he replied, brushing her question aside. "And frankly, your tone is disrespectful." Crockett didn't flinch. "Respect isn't a tone, Mr. Trump. It's earned." A low hum rippled across the room. The cameras tightened their focus. Even C-SPAN's live stream started scrolling comments faster. Trump waved a hand dismissively, brushing the air as if swatting away a fly. Then, with the bravado of a man accustomed to a lifetime of saying whatever came to mind, he looked straight at her and said, "Sit down, girl." It landed like a hammer. The room didn't gasp. It froze. The chairman lowered his gavel slowly, uncertain whether to call for order or to comprehend what had just happened. Aides stopped typing mid-word. A few Republican representatives glanced down. Others raised their eyebrows. Yet no one spoke. Crockett didn't respond immediately. She blinked once, then twice, allowing the moment to settle. It felt like watching someone walk deliberately across broken glass, every second more tense than the last. She adjusted her microphone, leaned in, and looked directly at him, not with anger, but with clarity. "Let me make this plain, Mr. Trump," she said, her voice smooth and measured. "You might have spoken to many women like that in your life, but I'm not here to serve you. I'm here to serve the truth. So, if my questions make you uncomfortable, perhaps that speaks more about your answers than about my tone." The silence in the room deepened. Then, from somewhere behind her, a staffer whispered quietly. "Damn." Crockett pressed on, unfazed. "And one more thing. Your inability to address the facts without resorting to dismissive language is not strength, it's avoidance. And you will not avoid me today." For a moment, Trump didn't reply. He tapped the pen on the table, mouth slightly open, searching for a comeback that refused to surface. The chairman finally spoke. "Mr. Trump, please respond to the question." But the moment had already stolen the spotlight. This was no longer about tax records or overseas accounts. It was about power and about who was still allowed to wield it and who refused to be silenced. Inside the media booth, CNN and MSNBC producers scrambled. "Clip that," one said. "That's going everywhere online." And it didn't take long. Within 15 minutes, the exchange had been clipped, captioned, and shared. Twitter, Facebook, and TikTok lit up. The phrase, "sit down, girl," surged globally within an hour, but not for the reasons Trump might have hoped. Somewhere in Fort Worth, an elderly woman paused her ironing to replay the clip, shaking her head. "Lord have mercy," she whispered. That girl just told him. Crockett's words weren't merely a comeback. They touched a deeper nerve, something that felt long overdue, and it changed the air in the room. You could sense it, that quiet shift that happens when a line has been crossed, and no one quite knows how to respond. The hearing room had witnessed countless heated exchanges before, shouting matches, walkouts, even tears. But this was different. This silence wasn't about shock. It was about recognition. Everyone present knew precisely what had happened. Even if no one spoke aloud, Representative Jasmine Crockett didn't raise her voice. She didn't slam the desk or lean back in her chair. When she was finished, she simply sat composed, flipped to the next page of her documents, and acted as if Trump hadn't tried to diminish her with a single word, a word that carried the weight of history, a word that felt tired and familiar to women like her due seats down. Representative Monica Rayburn broke the silence. She glanced at Crockett and exhaled slowly. "That's how you do it," she whispered under her breath. more to herself than anyone else. Across the aisle, Representative Neil Camden jotted down a note, leaning to whisper to an aide. She just turned the room upside down. Trump's expression had changed. The smirk was gone. The swagger drained from his voice. He appeared not defeated, but thrown off balance, as if someone had delivered a blow in a language he didn't understand. Still, he tried to regain his footing. I'm just saying, he offered quietly enough for the microphone to pick up. There's a way to talk to people, but no one responded right away. The room felt like it had tilted, the focus now on him, and that perhaps was what shook him most. The chairman tapped the gavel, not to scold, but simply to move forward. Let's proceed. Representative Crockett, you have the floor. And she did in every sense of the phrase. Crockett resumed her questions with the same calm precision. She didn't return to what had just happened. She didn't need to. The moment had already done its work, and it would carry itself far. Beyond the walls of the hearing room, news vans adjusted their banners. Headlines quickly emerged. Trump tells Representative Crockett to sit down, girl, during heated exchange. Inside cable newsrooms, producers yelled into their headsets, drop the budget segment, lead with Crockett, get the full clip. And across the country, in living rooms, office spaces, and bars, people rewound the scene and watched it play out, sharing it with colleagues and friends. At a bar in Columbus, Ohio, two teachers on their lunch break sat in silence, staring. At a muted television, one of them, Janice, shaking her head slowly. Did he really just say that? One woman mouthed as she watched the scene. Her friend nodded, unable to look away. She handled it like a sniper. In a dorm room in Tempe, Arizona, a political science major named Malik Thomas opened his laptop and started a thread titled, Why This Crockett Moment Matters More Than You Think. By morning, it had been shared over 90,000 times. Meanwhile, inside the Capitol, journalists clustered in the corridors, hoping to position themselves near Crockett as soon as the hearing adjourned. But her team had already closed ranks. She wouldn't be making a statement, not tonight, not yet. As she walked out quietly, flanked by aides, and avoiding the flash of cameras, one reporter called out a question. She didn't respond. Her body language spoke for itself. This wasn't about going viral. This was about doing the job. Later that evening, her communications director, Kiara Owens, opened her phone and nearly dropped it. The clip had surged to over 2 million views in just 4 hours. The hashtag was trending. Celebrities were quoting her words. Civil rights leaders were calling for interviews. Kiara looked over at Crockett, who was calmly finishing up a stack of documents at her desk. You know they're calling this the line of the decade, right? Crockett didn't glance. Up, they can call it what they want, she replied quietly. I call it Tuesday. While she stayed focused, the rest of the country was just starting to react, and the conversation was about to explode. Long before she was Congresswoman Crockett, long before the cameras and trending hashtags, she was simply Jasmine, a girl, raised in St. Louis, Missouri. Her mother worked nights at a health clinic. Her father drove a school bus every morning, never missing a shift. They lived by one rule. You didn't speak unless you had something worth saying. And when you spoke, you said it like you meant it. Even as a student, she had a way of making people pause. In high school, friends would tease that she didn't just argue, she cross-examined. At 16, she started attending municipal court proceedings after class. Not for credit, not for school, just to watch, to listen, to understand how the truth sounded when it had nowhere to hide. Her path to politics started in a Texas courtroom. Fresh out of law school, she took on a case no one wanted. A young man wrongfully arrested and held for 3 days with no charges. He had no money for a lawyer, and the city wanted the matter buried. But Crockett refused to take the easy route. She stayed up for 2 nights, combing through documents, finding inconsistencies in the officers' reports, interviewing witnesses no one had bothered to ask. When she walked into that courtroom and laid it all out, the judge stopped her midway through opening statements. Miss Crockett, he said, you sure you're fresh out of school? She smiled. Only on paper, Your Honor. The case was won in less than an hour. The word quickly spread. That was how she worked quiet victories with loud impact. Over the next 5 years, she became the person families called when every other option had failed. Police misconduct, land disputes, evictions. She worked cases for free when she had to, making her living from those she could charge. By the time she announced her run for the state legislature, she was more than known. She was trusted. Crockett didn't speak like a politician. She spoke like someone who had sat at kitchen tables where there were no lobbyists, no wealthy donors, just people trying to make ends meet. And that's why, when she won her seat in the Texas House, she was told to keep her head down, learn the game, and play it safe. Instead, she did the opposite. In her first year, she authored a bill challenging aggressive policing during protests. It didn't pass, but the hearings drew national attention. C-SPAN viewers watched as she remained calm, hair pulled back, voice measured, surrounded by men twice her age, none able to make her flinch. In Washington, party leaders started watching those moments too, on mute, just to study her body language. She didn't fidget, didn't smile unless she meant it, never raised her voice unless it counted. So when she announced her run for Congress, it wasn't about ambition. It was about scale, about making sure her voice was loud enough that she didn't have to shout down a hallway anymore. When she won, she sent her mother a note. "You told me to make my voice matter. I found a bigger mic." That was why, when Trump said, "Sit down, girl," in front of the world, she didn't flinch. She'd heard worse from judges, from police chiefs, from wealthy developers who assumed she was the assistant. But she also knew something else. Millions of people were watching. Girls who looked like her. Women who had been dismissed for decades. With that same lazy disrespect, she didn't need to scream, didn't need to toss papers or walk out. All she had to do was what she had always done, cut to the truth and let it stand on its own. That was why the clip hit so hard. It wasn't just a viral moment, it was a culmination. A chapter in a story that had started long ago in courtrooms and city halls, across countless late nights spent staring at spreadsheets and affidavits, making sure someone didn't lose their home. And now, all that history had met its moment on a platform too big to ignore, but the cameras only captured the exchange. What they missed was what happened when the room began to empty. The hearing adjourned just after 5:30. The real noise started after the cameras stopped rolling. Inside the committee room, aides scrambled to gather files while reporters tried to snag off record quotes from members slipping out the side exits. Security escorted Trump out through a separate door, shielding him from the growing crowd of journalists that lined the steps of the Capitol behind the dais. Jasmine Crockett quietly collected her papers, neither rushing nor dawdling. A junior staffer handed her a bottle of water. She took it, nodded slightly, and started down the hallway. She hadn't said a word about the moment yet, not to anyone, not to the press, not tonight. But every person around her felt the weight of it. Farther down the corridor, Representative Elaine Brewster leaned against a marble column, whispering into her phone. "Yes, I heard it live." No, she didn't flinch. Yes, he really said that. 2 floors down, the press room was in chaos. Dozens of journalists yelled questions as tweets flew every second. "Need confirmation. Trump said girl. On the record? Has Crockett made any statement? Check if she's doing MSNBC tonight." Meanwhile, inside a private office just off the floor, Trump was fuming. "That woman, she was disrespectful," he barked to an aide. "I was answering the damn question." The aide didn't reply. He just stood quietly, watching. At the windows, a team of PR strategists huddled, debating their next move. "Should we spin this as banter?" one asked. "No," another said sharply. The tone was too serious, too sharp. And that was the thing about moments like these. Sometimes, when the truth lands just right, no amount of spin can save it. "You try to make this a joke, you'll only make it worse," one aide muttered. "We should have seen it coming. She's got a courtroom mouth." Trump overheard that part. What?" he asked, turning sharply. "Meaning she doesn't. Bite it bait," the aide replied quietly. "She waits for you to hang yourself." Back in Crockett's office, her chief of staff, Kiara, was pacing the floor with a phone pressed to her ear. Every few seconds it buzzed with another call. CNN, MSNBC, the route. Even a French outlet wanted a comment. But Jasmine was still, silent, still seated, still sipping her water. "I need to talk to her," Kiara said sharply into the phone. "No, I don't know if she's making a statement. I don't think she's going to play it that way." She glanced over. "You okay?" Jasmine met her gaze for just a second. "I'm fine. We didn't come here to feed a moment. We came here to ask questions." But even she knew it was bigger than that now. Outside the Capitol, protesters had started to gather. Some held signs that read, "Respect Black Women." Others wore T-shirts printed with her words in bold. Someone had put them on Etsy within hours. One reporter tried to ask as she exited, "Congresswoman Crockett, do you feel disrespected?" She stopped, turned slowly, and looking directly into the microphone replied, "I feel focus." That clip alone was enough for every morning show headline. Inside conservative circles, the spin had already started. Talk radio hosts played the exchange on a loop, trying to justify Trump's tone as colloquial. Others tried to pivot, barking, "What about her attitude? What about her tone?" But this wasn't about tone anymore. It was about a pattern dot in progressive spaces. The response came quickly. "Black women don't get to have bad days." One commentator wrote, "They get told to sit down, no matter how qualified, how calm, how right they are." Meanwhile, Crockett's inbox overflowed. Messages came in from strangers across the country, some supportive, some hateful. One in particular stopped her cold. It read, "You didn't raise your voice. You didn't back down. You didn't flinch. My daughter just asked me what your name was. That means something. Thank you." She read it 3 times, but outside her office, the media storm was nowhere near finished. And Trump's team wasn't going quiet for long. By nightfall, the Trump media machine was humming. The clip had gone viral, yes, but that didn't mean they had to let the narrative stand. Not without a fight. Inside a sleek office space in Arlington, a team of communication strategists clustered around a screen, replaying the exchange for the 10th time. "She didn't yell," one pointed out. "She didn't get emotional. That's going to make it harder for us." "So we flip it," another responded. "Say he was being casual. Say she misunderstood him." An intern spoke up, voice wavering. "But it doesn't sound casual." The room fell quiet. Trump, watching from Mar-a-Lago on a private feed, leaned back in his chair. "They'll forget about it in a week," he said. "We just need something louder to push it out of the headlines." So the plan was set. Distract, discredit, double down. First came tweets from allies. One senator announced, "What happened today wasn't offensive. It was political theater. Representative Crockett knows how to play for the cameras." Another pundit wrote, "This is what happens when we can't talk anymore without someone crying." Racism. The next morning, Trump went on a conservative radio show in Palm Springs. The host asked, "Do you regret what you said to Representative Crockett?" Trump gave a low chuckle. "Regret? No. I was trying to get through a long hearing. She kept going on, and I said what I said. People are too sensitive." He waved it off. "But you know what? A lot of people agree with me. They just won't say it out loud." He grinned like it was a win, but the damage refused to fade. Meanwhile, Crockett remained largely silent, aside from that brief statement outside the Capitol. The quiet spoke louder than any press release. People wanted a reaction. What they got was focus, not a headline, a witness. That night, during a segment on CBS, political analyst Trevor Langford spoke plainly. This isn't about a phrase. It's about a habit. It's about a man who has spent decades acting like power excuses everything. Back in Texas, local stations aired specials titled "Who is Jasmine Crockett?" profiling her rise, her record, her victories in the courtroom. Viewers who never heard her name were suddenly paying attention. Meanwhile, her staff worked around the clock. Every platform wanted her. The Today Show, CNN, NPR, late night. But Crockett was selective. She didn't want a media tour. She wanted the record to stand for itself. She told her team, "This is about what he said, but it's also about how I responded. That's what matters." Still, online attacks surged. Fake quotes circulated. Doctored images. Old footage ripped from context and framed as evidence she was hostile or disrespectful. One video compiled every moment she'd interrupted a speaker and circulated it in far-right spaces, racking up tens of thousands of views. But for every manipulated clip, 5 genuine moments surfaced, moments that showed her composed, sharp and unshakable when it counted. A young journalist named Maya Latin captured it best in an article for the Arizona Times. "We don't ask men to make themselves smaller to be heard. We ask women to smile while being dismissed." Crockett didn't smile. She didn't yell. She corrected, and that correction spoke louder than any shout ever could. Meanwhile, Trump's defenders grew louder, but their words felt like shouts over a crowd that had already turned its head. Deep down, even Trump knew this wasn't going away quietly. While his team scrambled for distractions, the rest of the country had already started a different conversation, one that Crockett didn't have to lead, because she had sparked it. By the 3rd day, the story was everywhere. Morning shows framed it one way, late-night comics another. College professors dissected it in lectures about ethics and politics. Conservative hosts railed about weaponized identity politics. But for millions, the point was already made, and it was going to stick. Progressives called it long overdue accountability. And somewhere between all the yelling, something else started to happen. People actually started listening. It wasn't about policy anymore, not taxes or trade, not even about Trump. It was about the moment, the sentence, what it represented. In Birmingham, Alabama, a high school debate coach named Lorraine Reeves played the clip for her students, then paused the screen. "Tell me what you saw," she said. A girl in the front row raised her hand. "He didn't expect her to answer like that," she said. Another chimed in. "It's like he thought he was talking to someone who wouldn't answer at all." The room nodded. Out in Des Moines, Iowa, a retired librarian named Tom Beck posted a message on Facebook that quietly went viral. It read, "I'm 76. I've seen my share of hearings, scandals, speeches, but this wasn't about left or right. This was about whether we still let people with power speak to others like they don't deserve to be in the room." The post was shared over 20,000 times. In Phoenix, a woman named Farrah Densley, someone who had never been involved in politics, uploaded a short video explaining why Crockett's response brought her to tears. Her voice shook as she spoke. "My daughter's going to grow up in a world where she can hear that kind of sentence and understand exactly what it means and how to respond." Even comedians joined in. Will Ortega said it best on the Hamilton show. "She didn't clap back. She didn't pop off. She told the truth, and that shook people more than anything." Truth, calmly delivered, from a black woman they thought they could talk over, but the divide was clear. Crockett's congressional inbox overflowed. Thousands of messages came pouring in, many supportive, some hateful. One simply read, "You're everything wrong with this country. Sit down," just like he said. Crockett didn't reply. She never responded to those, but her staff felt the sting. Late one night, Kiara scrolled through the messages and whispered, "It's always louder when they feel seen." "Yeah," Crockett said quietly from across the room, "because silence protects them." By then, social media had embraced Crockett as both a symbol and a standard. Black women quoted her words in Instagram captions. Young girls posted side-by-side images of her and other barrier-breaking women. Twitter threads unpacked, "Sit down," grow like a case study in American power dynamics. But this wasn't just commentary anymore. Something deeper was happening. In Spokane, Washington, a group of middle-aged women organized a letter-writing campaign. They mailed handwritten notes of gratitude to Crockett's office. More than 300 arrived by the end of the week. Then came the poll numbers. An independent survey revealed a rare spike in public support for Crockett, especially among voters aged 40 to 60 across both parties. Even more surprising, nearly 40% of self-identified. Independents said the exchange made them more interested in hearing her views on policy. That's when people knew this was more than a trending topic. This was resonance. In private, Crockett kept her circle tight. She didn't cry. She didn't vent. But she did call her father one night. "You sounded like your mom in that hearing," he said. She smiled. She would have thrown her shoe. "Nah," he replied. She would have made him hand it back to her first. It was a rare moment of lightness in a week that had felt heavier than anyone expected. Because even as the country argued, dissected, defended, and posted, one truth remained unchanged. Crockett didn't ask for this moment. She just refused to run from it. But what no one expected was that one quiet reply would spark something much louder. Just a few days later came a letter from someone she'd never met. 3 days after the hearing, the national conversation stopped being just about Jasmine Crockett and Donald Trump. It started spreading, stretching in the corners of American life that rarely make it on the cable news. People weren't just talking. They weren't just posting. They were reflecting, sharing, and grappling with what it means to be heard when you're not the expected voice in the room, especially when that room holds power. In Boulder, Colorado, Professor Shelby Gaines stood before a packed lecture hall, chalk in hand. She replayed the clip for her students and circled the word truth on the board. "This," she said, "is what composure sounds like when it stands next to power." A student raised his hand. "Why did this go so viral?" "I mean," he said. "Worse," Professor Gaines nodded. "Because sometimes it's not the words, it's the setting. It's who says them, who they're said to, and who refuses to shrink when they are." Meanwhile, back in Dallas, Reverend Carl Winston preached a Sunday sermon without notes, pacing the aisles of his small church. "They told her to sit down," he said, voice rising. "But she sat in her truth, and that church is resistance." Few miles away, in a black-owned coffee shop just off South Lamar, regulars argued over lattes and headlines. She played it perfect, one woman said, stirring her tea. Didn't give them a sound bite, gave them a mirror. But what if she had clapped back harder? Her friend wondered aloud. No, a man at the counter said, turning to join the conversation. That's why it hit hard. She didn't need to be louder to be stronger. Not everyone agreed. Certain commentators tried to twist the moment. On cable news, one guest shrugged and said, maybe that's just how he talks. Shouldn't we give him the benefit of the doubt? The clips circulated quickly, and the rebuttals came just as fast. The moment became a prism for countless stories about women, especially black women, being dismissed, talked over, called girl by men with less experience and more status. An assistant principal in El Paso posted a video saying she'd been called girl 5 times in her career, every time by a man in a suit. A CFO in Portland published an op-ed titled, I was told to calm down girl, recounting the moment she was silenced in a budget meeting. These stories poured out like water behind a broken dam, not with sudden outrage, but with long-held, quiet exhaustion finally finding its voice. Through it all, Crockett refused to play the celebrity. She declined interviews on the biggest national platforms. She refused to frame herself as a victim. Her only public comment came quietly during a Q&A. With a local journalist in Austin, the question came sharply, do you think he was being intentionally disrespectful? Crockett paused, then said calmly, I think intent is less important than impact. And if someone doesn't understand the weight of their words, maybe they shouldn't be carrying them in public. That line landed just as hard as the one from the hearing. In Detroit, civil rights organizers started putting together Speak It workshops for young women of color. The first flyer read, you don't have to yell to be powerful, just be clear. At a school board meeting in Tallahassee, a high school junior named Jaya read Crockett's words aloud before proposing a student-led ethics committee. The room gave her a standing ovation. Somewhere in the background of it all, political. Analysts started whispering about 2028, not because Crockett had said a word about it, but because something had shifted, and her name was at the center of it. One evening, as Crockett and her communications director Kiara sorted through a flood of emails, Kiara glanced at a stack of screenshots. You realize people are putting your quote on coffee mugs now, she said. Crockett didn't even look up. I hope they're spelling it right. You're not moved by any of this, Kiara pressed. Crockett shrugged. I'm moved by the fact that more people are listening. Not to me, but to each other. But what neither of them expected was the message buried deep in her inbox. That night, not from a reporter, not from a fan, not from a politician, but from someone who knew exactly what it felt like to be told to sit down and decided to stand instead. It was nearly midnight when Kiara spotted it wedged between dozens of interview requests and press summaries. The subject line reads simply, "Thank you from Tulsa." There was no signature, no title, no Twitter handle, just a short message from someone named Clara Bishop. Kiara opened it, expecting another polite note. What she read made her stop cold. Dear Representative Crockett, I watched what happened at the hearing. I've watched it 5 times now. I'm 68 years old. I've never written to a politician. In my life, when he told you to sit down, I heard my high school principal in 1973 tell me, you're not the kind of girl who gives speeches. When you looked up and answered him, without yelling, without backing away, without pretending it didn't happen, I felt 17 again. I felt like I mattered. You didn't just speak for yourself. You spoke for every woman who was ever told to lower her voice when her truth made people uncomfortable. Thank you. With deep respect, Clara Bishop, Tulsa, Oklahoma. Kiara didn't forward it right away. She just sat with it. The next morning, she handed the phone to Crockett. Read this, she said quietly. Crockett read in silence, then set the phone down slowly. Do you want me to respond? Kiara asked. Crockett thought for a moment. No, I want to meet her. 3 days later, Crockett's office arranged a visit. No cameras, no press release, just a quiet meeting in a public library in downtown Tulsa. When Clara walked in, a woman in a simple tan coat holding a worn notebook, Crockett stood and smiled. I'm not here as a congresswoman today, she said. Clara smiled back. And I'm not 68 today. I'm 17. You gave me that. They talked for over an hour. No staff, no reporters. Clara shared stories of growing up in segregated neighborhoods, of watching leaders rise and fall, of being passed over for promotions by men she had trained herself. I stopped raising my hand, she said quietly. Figured there wasn't much point. Crockett listened, leaned in, asked questions. At one point, Clara pulled out a folded newspaper clipping of Shirley Chisholm. "When I was little, this was the woman we thought would break it all open," she said. Crockett nodded. "She cracked it. Now we keep widening the gap." When the meeting ended, they hugged. Nothing formal, nothing posed. Just a quiet moment between two women by the front window, laughing. Clara's granddaughter, who had driven her there, snapped a quick photo and posted it later that day. The caption read, "My grandma met her hero today." They didn't talk politics. They talked truth. The photo spread like wildfire. By the end of the week, Ava DuVernay, Tracy Ellis Ross, and Sherilyn Ifill had shared it, each adding their own caption about legacy, lineage, and quiet courage. Clara Bishop, a woman who had never had a social media account, became a trending name overnight. When CNN picked up the story, the headline read, "The letter that said everything without a microphone." Requests flooded into interview. Clara, she declined everyone. She only agreed to write a piece for the Tulsa Sentinel, her hometown paper. It was titled, "The Day I Felt Heard," and in it she described Crockett not as a politician, but as a mirror held up to a nation too, used to looking away. Meanwhile, Crockett issued no press release about the visit, no campaign video, no photo op. When asked about it during an interview weeks later, she simply said, "Some moments belong to the people who live them, not the people who watch." That line became a headline across 3 political blogs the next morning. The whole exchange, one letter, one meeting, one photo, reminded people that real change doesn't always come from the biggest stages. Sometimes it starts with a quiet reply that lands in the inbox of someone who thought their voice had been lost. But while that story settled into hearts across the country, another shift was happening, this time inside the very institution where it had all begun. The House of Representatives doesn't move quickly, not for outrage, not for media pressure, not even for its own reputation. But this felt different. A week after the exchange, the Ethics Committee quietly convened, an emergency session behind closed doors. No press, no statements, just 12 members from both parties staring at the same screen, watching the same 47-second clip. "Sit down, girl, pause." Then Crockett's reply, silence. Even those who usually rolled their eyes at optics admitted this one was different. It wasn't just bad PR. It was a moment that made the whole chamber feel complicit. Some representatives wanted to let it pass. Others, especially those up for re-election, pushed for a statement of condemnation. Not of Trump specifically, but of disrespectful language itself, directed toward any member regardless of gender or background. It wasn't much, but it was a crack. Meanwhile, on the House floor, whispers of procedural reform started circulating. Conversations about setting clearer boundaries for how witnesses address members bubbled up. One proposal floated making briefings mandatory for former presidents called to testify because, apparently, that's where we were now. Outside politics, the shift was quieter but unmistakable. Crockett was invited to speak at Stanford's School of Government, then at Harvard Law, and later at a small community college in Jackson, Mississippi. She accepted all 3. At Stanford, she didn't start with the hearing. She started with a story about her first landlord case as a public defender. "These people weren't waiting for a headline," she said. "They were waiting for someone to speak plainly, to listen clearly, to make room for truth in spaces that weren't built for it." At Harvard, she spoke about tone, about how women of color are told their volume is too loud, even when they whisper, how their questions are called too aggressive, even when they're fair. And in Jackson, she set aside her notes altogether and asked the room a simple question. What do you do when someone tells you to sit down? Polite, cool, or quiet? A student in the front row raised a hand. "You stand anyway." Crockett smiled. Exactly. Back in D.C., younger representatives started echoing that posture, not mimicking it, but claiming permission. Suddenly, being direct didn't seem so abrasive. Being clear didn't seem so risky. Crockett kept working. In the weeks that followed, she introduced 2 new pieces of legislation, one on data transparency in federal contracting, another on public protections during emergency detentions. Neither had anything to do with the hearing, but both were rooted in the same belief: truth works best in daylight. Meanwhile, Trump was still fuming. At a fundraiser in Pensacola, he called the hearing a setup and insisted the clip had been twisted. He mocked her attitude until a donor pressed him. "Do you regret saying it?" He only shrugged, changed the subject, and waved it away. Through it all, the world kept moving. Crockett's staff kept grinding. They barely had time to read the hundreds of invitations pouring in, let alone accept them. But one thing stood out, the shift in tone. These weren't just messages of praise anymore. They were moments of reflection. One came from a woman in Santa Fe. "I've worked in finance for 20 years. I've been called girl more times than I can count. I never said anything until I watched you. The next day, I walked into my boss's office and told him to call me by my name. Just my name. That felt like a win." Another came from a teenage boy in Oregon. "I watched your video and showed it to my mom. She cried. I didn't get why at first, but then she told me stories about how people spoke to her at work. Now I get it. Thank you." Crockett read. Everyone. She didn't save the headlines. She saved the letters. But while policies were debated and stories circulated, one final question surfaced quietly. What does respect look like when the cameras are off and no one is trending anymore? The clip faded from trending lists. New stories came and went. New distractions flared and fizzled. But for many people, that moment never really left. Not because of the drama, but because of what it revealed and what it asked of us. In the months that followed, Representative Jasmine Crockett never called it a viral moment, never called it historic, never offered a clean, polished narrative for the media to run with, because she knew better than most that real change doesn't happen in sound bites. It doesn't happen in a headline. It happens in conversations, in the quiet moments, in the decisions people make about how they show up when no one is watching. Crockett kept working. She kept showing up to hearings, kept making her questions sharp and direct, kept writing legislation that most people will never read, but that will affect real lives. She met with constituents in strip malls, church basements, and high school auditoriums, answering questions about housing, healthcare, and transportation like the clip had never happened. That's what made people respect her more. Not the clapback, not the attention, not the soundbite, but the steadiness. She didn't turn that moment into a brand. She let it become a reference point, proof of what it looks like to stand your ground without turning your voice into a weapon. That's what stuck with people. A teacher in Flagstaff said it best during a parent-teacher forum. "My daughter watched that video. She didn't see a woman being disrespected. She saw a woman responding like she knew who she was. And that matters, especially in a time when overreaction is a currency. In an age of noise, calm became radical. Here's the truth. There are still too many rooms in this country where respect is unevenly distributed. Too many tables where certain people are expected to stay quiet. Too many conversations where power demands obedience, not honesty. But moments like this don't just expose the cracks. They also show us who's ready to push back. Not with a shout, not with a scene, but with stillness. Sometimes strength is the ability to let someone show their hand while you hold your ground. Sometimes strength is saying, "You don't get to talk to me like that." Simple, clear, undeniable. So what's the lesson? Maybe it's this. If you know who you are, you don't have to prove it every time someone tries to shrink you. You just have to stay consistent, stay grounded, stay rooted in your truth. Because sooner or later, people will notice. They'll remember the way you carried yourself, the way you didn't flinch, the way you refused to match cruelty with cruelty, the way you made it clear, quietly, firmly, that your voice wouldn't be diminished. That's how truth travels, not always in a soundbite, not always in a headline. Sometimes it's in the way one moment lingers long after the cameras have gone. Sometimes it's in how one person speaks to the quiet knowing within themselves and reminds all of us to do the same. And if this story spoke to you, if it reminded you of a moment when you felt silence or inspired you to stand when it felt easier to stay seated, don't let it stop here. Share it, talk about it, pass it on. Because these moments matter. Not for the noise, not for the show, but for the quiet shift they create and for the truth that stays long after the moment has passed. We're not here for the noise. We're here for what matters.